In this video, we are going to talk about affect and affect heuristic. First, what is affect? Affect is an inclusive term for emotions, mood, feelings, and emotion related traits. Affect heuristic is people's tendency to rely on affect to make decisions by deriving risks and benefits when evaluating options. Some people use emotions and feelings interchangeably. Are they different? What is an emotion exactly? To define emotions, we'll need to start with feelings. Feelings are mental experiences that accompany a change in body state. Feelings can be triggered by both internal and external stimuli. When our brain does not have sufficient blood flow, we feel dizzy. When our blood sugar is low, we feel our vision becomes blurred. Feelings can also be triggered by external stimuli, such as social interactions. As the saying goes, words are said, feelings are hurt. Emotions, on the other hand, are largely triggered by external stimuli from the five senses, such as sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. In emotion research, subjective feelings are only one component of emotions. In addition to subjective feelings, emotions have two other components. One is physiological responses, such as the racing heart, spiking blood pressure, or sweaty palms. The other component of emotions is behavioral responses, such as averting others' eyes when we feel guilty and cringe when we feel fearful. Mood is a relatively lasting state that is predominantly defined by subjective feelings that may or may not be linked to a specific event. And affect is an inclusive term for all of the above. The first example of the affect heuristic is how people decide punishing transgressors, particularly the outrage heuristic. To decide punishment, people usually begin by deciding how outrageous the transgression is. The more outrageous we feel, the harsher punishment we render. People's punishment judgments are rooted in outrage. We believe that penalties should be a proportional response to the outrageousness of a transgression. More importantly, we are especially angry when people betray our trust. When we trust someone, we accept the vulnerability based on positive expectations of the intentions or behavior of that person. We trust that military leaders protect our country. We trust that police officers protect us. We trust that doctors and nurses protect our health. We trust our spouse's commitment to marriage. We trust that school principals and teachers protect the children and promote learning. When our trust is violated, we experience intense visceral feelings which influence our judgment and decision making. According to a Pew Research Center survey in 2019, Americans had a relatively higher level of trust in school leaders in comparison with other power holders such as members of Congress, religious leaders, police officers, military leaders, and local elected officials. Despite the high level of trust in school leaders, survey respondents said principals, like many of their counterparts in power, often acted unethically. Looking at the figure here, you see that about 52% of survey respondents reported school principals acted unethically. And almost one third of the respondents reported that principals did not often admit mistakes or own up to them. Not admitting mistakes doesn't help build trust. These findings are quite alarming. According to the affect heuristic, the more trust the people put in school principals, the more outrageous when the principals behave unethically. Another example of the affect heuristic is telling stories. Stories, especially emotional ones, are powerful in attracting our attention. When the stories are about perseverance in the face of incredible adversity, it is difficult not to grow attached to them. Imagine that you are on an interview panel for hiring a school principal. The panel is wading through a large number of applications. You may grow fond of stories, the emotionally resonant stories that applicants share in their application materials and interviews, but you may focus too little on their competency and qualifications. Running for a political office, candidates get more attention by talking about emotionally provoking issues such as gun control, abortion, healthcare, rather than infrastructure and transportation. When the voters are not excited, the candidates usually don't get elected to an office. There is an old saying, don't allow emotions to cloud your judgment. People are often told to be rational instead of emotional. If you describe someone as emotional, people usually interpret it in a negative way. The view that emotions conflict with reason goes back at least to Plato, who said that the intellect needs to control passions as a charioteer controls a horse. Plato viewed emotions such as passion, desire, and fear as destructive forces pulling people away from reasoning. But is it true? According to the literature in neuroscience and psychology, emotions and cognition work together to generate a decision. Emotions narrow or broaden the scope of human attention, thereby influencing information input into the cognitive system in human brains. Emotionally salient stimuli, such as an armed intruder threatening students and teachers in a school building, demand our attention, allowing the cognitive system to focus selectively on the central details of the environment while ignoring or devoting fewer cognitive resources to peripheral details. Some emotions, such as fear and pride, narrow decision makers' attention, so they stick to an option about which they know more rather than searching for alternative options by seeking and taking others' advice. Other emotions, such as gratitude and shame, broaden decision makers' attention, enabling them to broadly explore options through advice seeking behavior. I have developed an organizing framework of school leaders' decision making, which is now in press in the Journal of Educational Administration Quarterly. This framework has four propositions. The first proposition is that decisions are the outcomes of the interactions between emotion and cognition. In human brains, the emotional system and the cognitive system are so intertwined in decision-making process that there is no emotion-cognition dichotomy. This means the emotional system and the cognitive system are not separate. It is biologically impossible to tune out emotions completely when we make rational decisions. Both emotions and cognition guide our decision making and the corresponding behavior. Therefore, emotions should not be simply dismissed as a disrupting force that cloud school leaders' decision making. The second proposition is that at the moment of decision making, emotions have a pervasive, predictable impact on decision making. Anger makes us aggressive and impulsive, but fear makes us flee from danger and threat. Even the same emotion of empathy could lead us to make moral decisions in some contexts, but make immoral decisions in others. The third proposition is that before making decisions, leaders' individual differences and organizational contexts have a bearing on leaders' emotions and decision making. Before making decisions, educational leaders' individual traits, such as trait affect and implicit power motivation, and organizational contexts, such as organizational justice and emotional contagion, can yield completely different emotions and decision outcomes. The fourth proposition is that post decision behavioral responses function as social stimuli, triggering more emotions, which in turn influence the next cycle of decision making process. Therefore, behaviors yield emotions, and emotions yield behaviors, and so on and so forth. In this video, we talked about the affect heuristic. What is affect heuristic? It is people's tendency to rely on affect to make decisions. I then provided some examples of the affect heuristics. Now it is time for you to provide an example of the affect heuristic and reflect on how the affect heuristic influences decisions made by you or the people around you.